Welcome again to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities by the great Vijayadhara Jigme Lingpa. So we are presently in the context of studying the Four Noble Truths, really, well, under the heading of understanding suffering. And so we understand suffering and essentially transcend suffering on the basis of the Four Noble Truths. So we understand that suffering is not something that's a given, it's not something that just happens, but it comes about due to causes and conditions. And now more specifically today, actually under the heading of what we call the truth among the Four Noble Truths and the truth of cessation and truth of the path, we're going to be studying this, you can say, more incisively in the context of studying the 12 links of dependent origination, which is a big theme in the Buddhist teaching. So kindly generate the attitude of bodhicitta, the attitude of understanding how this really is what will enable us to get to the bottom of what drives suffering universally. And as such, this project, our study, our practice of the path, and so on, is motivated not just by the wish to free ourselves from suffering, but to free sentient beings everywhere from suffering. And this is what we then are intending to do with the Buddhist path. So we can very justifiably think of this as pretty much the greatest project that could ever be. And so much of what we're doing on the Buddhist path is really beginning to expand beyond just, you could say, a rather ordinary vision into a much greater vision, both with regards to, you could say, our purpose and what we're doing, but also understanding the nature of reality, the nature of existence, far beyond the way that we ordinarily understand it in a sort of confined sense. So this being this something as great as that, we then open with the supplication invoking Jigme Lingpa, and here then we chant the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is noble, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind tamas, sky-like yogin, of the vast expanse of luminosity. Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So in the text, we are presently then looking at the 12 links of dependent arising. And let's just go to where in the footnotes there's some discussion around this. So again, when we talk about the suffering, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, we understand that reality doesn't exist as a reality out there. Reality is really the way that our mind constructs what we perceive of as reality. And suffering comes from when we misperceive reality. And that's the cause of suffering. We take the subjective dimension of this cognitive experience that we have as a self and essentially impute solidity onto our subjective experience and to what appears as the field within our experience. And that then becomes the foundation for what we call duality, self and other. And within that, then the whole array of samsara plays out. And this is what the Buddha wishes to get to the bottom of. So that's why we practice the path. But for us to actually engage in the practice of the path, we need to know what is it, where from does confusion originate? Because that's then where we can get at it. And then we understand also the path, that we just don't blindly follow the path, but we have exactly a very clear understanding of what it is the path is addressing. So this is where the understanding of the dependent nature of samsara is so helpful in understanding where our confusion originates from. And so I'm going to be here then referring to the footnotes, explanatory notes, and also really brilliant and I think for us modern people, quite clear understanding of how this confusion originates. So anyway, let's first look at then the footnotes here. It probably is from, and this is from, well, let's see if it is from Kangyur Rinpoche. No, it doesn't say. So this is probably from the translators. Anyway, it says here, the principle of dependent arising, tendril chunyi. And that's, tendril means essentially, you could say a chain, a link, one based upon the other, tendril, how you could say one thing is based upon the other. So we can talk about the links of dependent arising, 12 in number. So this principle, tendril chunyi, also refers to the law, also referred to as the law of interdependence, is one of the most important and profound of the Buddha's teachings. It describes 12 factors linked interdependently in the form of a cycle that revolves without beginning or ending. The fact that ignorance is posited as the first link does not mean that it is a permanently existing first cause. It is, however, the main factor, together with craving and grasping, that brings about this cycle. If this is eliminated, the entire cycle is interrupted. And that is what we're doing when we meditate. We begin to, essentially, we begin to disrupt unawareness with awareness. Essentially, the 12 links are the way in which unawareness plays out. Then they say the 12 links of dependent arising do not imply causality in a strictly chronological sequence. In the production of a plant, for instance, the principal factor is the seed, but many other conditions, such as soil, moisture, and warmth, must also coexist and be present. Likewise, certain links in the cycle must coincide chronologically. There are many traditional ways of explaining this principle, both from the standpoint of the Theravadan, such as Buddha Ghosha's Vishuddhimarga or Samoha Vinodani, and also from the Mahayana perspective, such as Sangha's Abhidhamma Samuccaya. This is only the bare outline of a profound and difficult subject. So this is very profound, and there's going to be some aspects of this which are interesting. And you could say, just like anything that we study that sort of goes to the bottom of things, yeah, there's an element of complexity, but it's not as if we can't understand this. And the very core of it is essentially that this spells out and identifies the element of essentially a progression of what happens when we unconsciously just tag along with unawareness. And what we're doing to remedy this is awareness. But like I said before, this is the biggest project ever. So we shouldn't be surprised there's a little bit to be known about it, just then you could say just being aware and unaware, which could be slightly vague. And the more actually we have some grip on how these factors play out, the more we have a, you could say, informed relationship with this. And this really becomes the foundation of what we call the view, or the foundation of our practice. So the following then, the doctrine of dependent arising is explained under 5 headings. Now, let me just see, there should be no, we're still within the same stanza. I'm just going to read the root stanza again, which is 44, which is the path, those rejecting them, referring essentially to the essentially what happens when we ignorantly cotton on, or rather get entangled with ignorance, what comes from that, kleshas, the toxic states of mind, and then the patterns of when we act out these toxic states of mind. So this is what we refer to as ignorance, and then what comes from that, karma and the defilements. And so then it says here, the path of those rejecting them, meaning ignorance, karma, and kleshas, the beings of middle scope, consists in driving in the chariot of the 4 truths, the 4 noble truths. And this we also said at the beginning of the chapter. They actualize cessation, which is the 3rd noble truth, nibbana, enlightenment, reaching supreme freedom, the state that lies beyond all suffering. So that's where we're what we're about. We're going to look into a little bit more. The root of all dependent things is ignorance, and then so forth. But presently, just with regards to understanding how we are getting to the bottom of suffering, then understanding where it comes from, and as such, actualizing the cessation of suffering, we have these 5 headings. So the necessity of this teaching, the definition of each link, 4 ways of presentation, the number of lifetimes required for an entire cycle, and the method of meditating on this doctrine. So someone here asks how we learn to crave. Well, it comes about. It's not something we just learn, but the moment that ignorantly we begin to cling to a self, then we begin to crave. So craving, you could say, is the nature of ignorance. It's the nature where we begin to want. Yeah, basically it's the most primitive, fundamental, you could say, position of the experience, the ignorant, unconscious experience of self. So that's where then we have a very real need for this teaching. It says here, a person who understands this teaching, namely that all phenomena of both samsara and nirvana are nothing but illusory appearances that manifest interdependently, will be free of false views and ultimately will attain the state beyond suffering. And that's why we need to know this like the back of our own hand. We need to be completely comfortable in this. It's not about just knowing a lot of details, but just having a sense of how ignorance plays out and what we can do about it. Really, it comes down to just fundamental ignorance. Of course, ignorance plays out then with a number of, you could say, causes and conditions, but essentially getting to the bottom of ignorance. And then that's what it says. It is said in the sutra, when this is, that is. This arising, that arises. For thus it is, because of ignorance, conditioned factors and the rest arise. All right? So once we had everything that we experience within this realm, really, of causes and conditions, which is the ever-changing, you could say, display, which when it's solidified, we begin to think, oh, there's actually something there. That's when we begin to live in a world of cause and effect, causes, conditions, and effect. And that is this nature of duality, in which things are continually based one on the other, and so forth. Once there's a seed, there's a sprout. Once there's a sprout, then on the basis of the causation of water, sunlight, and so on, then plant will emerge. But that's just an image we're giving right now. And what we're onto here is what happens when there's ignorance. Then we have a set of factors, consciousness of what's called karmic impulse, consciousness, and so forth. So the phrase, when this is, that is, indicate that all phenomena arise from existing causes. And we're talking about deluded phenomena of samsara. This contradicts the view of the Charvakas, who believe that phenomena are uncaused. It's like this very sort of unconscious view that, well, it's just there, right? The word this arising, that arises, as are an assertion to the effect that causes themselves arise through other causal conditions. So we have seed, but where does the seed come from? And we can trace backward. Consequently, a denial of the view of permanently existing cause. It's not like you have what you have in, for example, Aristotelian philosophy, where we say, oh, there's a first mover. God was first. Anything beyond that, no. Here we say, well, there was a seed, but that came from a previous plant, and that also came from sprouts, seeds, etc. Everything that we analyze comes about due to causes and conditions, and these causes and conditions themselves are caused. So just some sort of idea that everything just is problematic. Then where it says, finally, the sentence, for thus it is, because of ignorance, conditioning factors, and the rest arise, is a denial of the theory of the world, that the world manifests from the premeditated design of a divine creator. So that's, again, you could say, what it refutes this idea that we have the theistic idea of a creator God, as we have it in numerous religions, and also, of course, Aristotle, who wished to give an explanation. And this is where you had Greek rationality again, trying to accommodate the faith-based views that they then inherited from, or that of course not just inherited from the Abrahamic traditions, but also possibly that was already there within Greek time. So here we have, if I can get my, hello, having a bit of, okay, let's just go to footnotes. Yeah, 46. In other words, Buddhism denies the existence of a creator in the biblical sense, as well as that of the unmoved mover of Aristotelian philosophy. In fact, the belief in a creator God, or first cause, arises from an incorrect understanding of the nature of phenomena. For a more extensive treatment of this subject, see Kenshin Kunzang Palden, The Nectar of Manjushri's Speech. So there we have 8 pages in that, which would help us. But I'm going to draw on a less classical presentation, which is then from Chögyam Trungpa. Anyway, I'm just going to briefly go over this. Let's just see here. Yeah, might as well just do that. We're briefly going to name these 12. But the main thing that we want to be aware of is, how do we understand, how does this ignorance come about in the first place? We talk about ignorance, but not in this terms of something that happened 50,000 lifetimes ago, but something that happens every micro moment. And that's where the notion of ignorance is very much juxtaposed to the capacity for awareness, and untangled awareness that is primordial purity. And as we go through the teaching, what we call the ascending views of the various Buddhist vehicles, this ignorance is seen more and more as workable. There's more and more in a sense that this we could actually get to the bottom of, and it's doable. So that's where, anyway, here, ignorance, the first link, this means ignorance of the nature of the Four Noble Truths, the karmic law, and so forth. And due to this, the mistaken assumption of a self. What we essentially mean when we say then ignorance of the Four Noble Truths is simply understanding what the situation of ignorance and its, you can say, emergence and its also workability implies. So that is, you could say, the fundamental confusion. Most fundamental level of that is the mistaken assumption of a self. Then we have conditioning factors through believing in and clinging to the notion of I. Beings accumulate 3 types of actions. So these are, you could say, the impulses we have: positive acts tending to happiness, negative acts tending to suffering, and unwavering acts, which could go either way, the latter being the cause of birth in the realms of the higher gods. Consciousness, propelled by karma into a new life, consciousness has 2 aspects. First, there is the cause moment consciousness, in other words, the consciousness at the moment of the performance of an action. That's where we do something. And then second, there is the result moment consciousness, which is the consciousness experiencing the result of a particular action. Then we have name and form. This refers to the gradual formation of the aggregates after the consciousness has entered the womb. The 4 aggregates of feeling, perception, conditioning factors, and consciousness are grouped together as name, and to them is added the aggregate of form. So the 4 aggregates of feeling, perception, conditioning factors, and consciousness, they're all about the mind. The first one, form, has to do with our bodily form and all the perceptions of form in the world around us. The sense powers, these are the 5 faculties of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And to these is added the mental faculty. So we have six sense powers. Contact, this is the coming together of external objects and inner consciousness via the operation of the sense faculties whereby phenomena are detected. Okay? Feelings, the feelings of pleasure, displeasure, neutrality arising when objects are encountered. Craving, following from the above, this is the desire to experience what is pleasant and to avoid what is unpleasant. Grasping, this is the impulse to seize the desired object once craving arises. becoming due to craving and grasping, subsequent existences arise, the infallible result of actions accomplished. Birth, due to karma, birth follows in one of the states of existence. Aging and death, the period of aging corresponds to an entire span of life, from the moment of birth onward. When this is over, death occurs. Good. Okay, we're going to be looking at then, well, what I really want to get to the bottom of is then how do we understand this? And that's where I find it very helpful to have the explanation as we have it in one chapter of Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And that is, where does this all come from? I'm going to just read a couple of pages there. And I'd like to appreciate then also what Trungpa Rinpoche says here in terms of the importance of this. He says, as we're going to examine the Buddha's path from beginning to end, from the beginner's mind to the enlightened one, I think it would be best to start with something very concrete and realistic, the field we're going to cultivate. It would be foolish to study more advanced subjects before we're familiar with the starting point, the nature of ego. We have a saying in Tibet that is not very vegetarian, I apologize, but it says, before the head has been cooked properly, grabbing the tongue is of no use. Any spiritual practice needs this basic understanding of the starting point, the material with which we're working. If we do not know the material with which we are working, then our study is useless. Speculation about the goal becomes mere fantasy. These speculations may take the form of advanced ideas and descriptions of spiritual experiences, but they only exploit the weaker aspects of human nature, our expectations and desire to see something colorful, something extraordinary. If we our study with these dreams of extraordinary, enlightening, and dramatic experiences, then we will build up our expectations and preconceptions so that later, when we're actually working on the path, our minds will be occupied largely with what will be rather than with what is. So this is where we sort of have this phenomenon of spiritual bypass. We're sort of uninterested in the issues that we have. We're more sort of interested with all this sort of fun stuff that essentially just becomes entertainment. And we actually don't work with the, you could say, ordinary, embarrassing, pedestrian, domestic, the reality of who we are. Rather, we're sort of onto what might be, you know, the colorful experiences of the path and all sorts of exciting things, you know, special kind of practices, you know, tantra, longevity practice, you know, wealth practice, special rituals, pujas, all sorts of things. And Trungpa says it is destructive and not fair to people to play on their weaknesses, their expectations and dreams, rather than to present them the realistic starting point of what they are. It is necessary, therefore, to go to start on what we are and why we are searching. Generally, all religious traditions deal with this material, speaking variously of alaya vijnana, or original sin, or the fall of man, or the basis of ego, the idea of something went wrong. Most religions refer to this material in a somewhat pejorative way, but I do not think it is such a shocking or terrible thing. We do not have to be ashamed of what we are. As sentient beings, we have wonderful backgrounds. These backgrounds may not be particularly enlightened or peaceful or intelligent. Nevertheless, we have soil good enough to cultivate. We can plant anything in it. Therefore, in dealing with this subject, we are not condemning or attempting to eliminate our ego psychology. We're purely acknowledging it, seeing it as it is. In fact, the understanding of ego is the foundation of Buddhism. So let us see how ego develops. That's the thing. Understanding ego is what sets us free. The truth will set you free. Seeing ego for what it is what sets us free. Not sort of getting rid of the ego, suppressing the ego, being a good, you know, good boy or girl, but really just seeing, you could say, what's truly there. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, fundamentally, there is just open space, the basic ground, what we really are. Our most fundamental state of mind before the creation of ego is such that there is basic openness, basic freedom, a spacious quality. And we have now and have always had this openness. Take, for example, our everyday lives and thought patterns. When we see an object, in the first instance, there is a sudden perception which has no logic or conceptualization to it at all. We just perceive the thing in the open ground. Then immediately we panic and begin to rush about trying to add something to it, either trying to find a name for it or trying to find a world in which we could locate and categorize it. Gradually, things develop from there. So this is also well known from Western epistemology. We look at an object, and in fact, what we're seeing is not the object itself, but our version of the objective field. And we have this, that we just want to actually try to fit things in. You know, we relate to things, and the more we develop language and labels around it, the more we sort of feel we have a handle. Like we say to another person, I know you, yes. And that's where we then have a sense of, you know, you fit into what I would like. But in fact, we're not really experiencing the other person. We're just, say, labeling phenomena in a particular way. It's like you go and you look out at this great, beautiful landscape. You visit the Grand Canyon, and there you are. And then you go, oh, isn't this magnificent? And wonder what all the layers of these rocks are, etc. Then we need to begin to sort of diminish it into sort of objective categories so we can fit it. You know, we need to say something about it. We can't just take it in, sort of be exposed to the naked experience. We have to give it language. And that, of course, we might not do that. That's very good. But we have a tendency, and it's a universal thing. And again, it's not about good and bad. People who say things are wonderful, instead of just being quiet at the Grand Canyon, they're not, you know, they need to learn a lesson or two about how to look at things and just be quiet and nakedly appreciate it. We're not saying that. We're more interested in what's going on. And that's where we understand that, yes, this is what happens with our relationship to phenomena. So we might not make a fool of ourselves in a particular context, but it's basic to just the way that ego operates, that we try to pigeonhole and create reference points. The provocative thing that we're coming across here is that the nature of reality is not defined by that. That's where there's more to be had. So it's not about moralism or how we should behave with things. It's just beginning to understand, where does confusion set in? How could we dismantle it and see things more clearly? So Trungpa Rinpoche says then, this development does not take the shape of a solid entity. Rather, this development is illusory, the mistaken belief in a self or ego. Confused mind is inclined to view itself as a solid, ongoing thing. But it is only a collection of tendencies, events. In Buddhist terminology, this collection is referred to as the 5 skandhas or 5 heaps. So perhaps we could go through the whole development of the 5 skandhas. We're not going to do that here, but we're going to look at the first moment of ignorance. And that's what's helpful for our understanding of the 12 links. But I'll upload this chapter here to our Dropbox, and you actually do have then, I believe in this chapter, actually some description of what happens. Anyway, the beginning point is that there is open space belonging to no one. There is always primordial intelligence connected with the space and openness. Vijja, which means intelligence, in Sanskrit, precision, sharpness, sharpness with space, sharpness with room in which to put things, exchange things. So the Tibetan word for Vijja is Rigpa. So if you come across some of the instructions in meditation, and in general also in philosophy also, you do have the term Vijja, which generically means knowing or just awareness, also be quite specifically in the sense of the undiluted awareness. For example, in the context of Dzogchen, one talks about introduction to Rigpa. But also there's the general sense of just Rigpa meaning this cognitive capacity that we have. So that is where Trungpa Rinpoche says the beginning point is this primordial intelligence. So he says, it is like a spacious hall where there is room to dance about, where there is no danger of knocking things over or tripping over things, for there is completely open space. We are this space. We are one with it, with Vijja, intelligence and openness. But if we are this all the time, where did confusion come from? Where has the space gone? What has happened? Nothing has happened, as a matter of fact. We just became too active in that space. Because it is spacious, it brings inspiration to dance about. But our dance became a bit too active. We began to spin more than was necessary to express this space. At this point, we became self-conscious, conscious that I am dancing in that space, in the space. So this is something that probably we might experience sometimes. We're doing beautifully, and all of a sudden, there's the notion, oh, I'm doing beautifully, whether it's dancing or whatever, and all of a sudden there becomes a self-consciousness. Trungpa Rinpoche then says, at such a point, space is no longer space as such. It becomes solid. Instead of being one with the space, we feel solid space as a separate entity, as tangible. This is the first experience of duality, space and I. That's where we are then. We say one with the flow of things, and then all of a sudden we think I versus the onlooker or the space with which we are engaging. And that's where all of a sudden we then have this experience, space and I. This is not philosophy, by the way. And in fact, you could say any Buddhist teaching is never really philosophy, because it's really about touching on experience. The science of Buddhism is not about objective things out there. It's always about personal experience. So what we're talking about here is not something that happened 50,000 lifetimes ago. It's something that happens every moment, and things that we probably could sort of nod to and say, yeah, I know what that feels like. And this is, you could say, the brilliance of Trungpa Rinpoche, that he can present this very much in terms of the vernacular, the way that we speak and experience in our particular modern culture. So he says, I am dancing in this space, and this spaciousness is a solid, separate thing. Duality means space and I. So we might initially say, oh yeah, I am dancing great, and here I am. But there's already a sort of duality, me and my display. So duality means space and I, rather than being completely one with the space. This is the birth of form, of other. Let's just leave it at that. And I would encourage you to read on from there. But this is essentially what we then refer to as the first moment of these 12 links. I have here the same links again, and I think I've already uploaded that. But this is something I did together with a friend of mine some years ago, which is essentially an overview of what we call the wheel of existence. What you very often would have seen, this circle of the various realms of samsara and the conditions that drive this circle. But in there you have, on the outer periphery, you have then these 12 links. And yeah, let's just bite the bullet. And we aren't doing that right now. Let's just go over it again. This is again drawing to on the explanations of Trungpa Rinpoche and also others in a slightly more contemporary language. So this is sort of highlighting what we just looked at before. Ignorance, the first one. And this is again drawing on the image of the wheel of existence. A blind person with a stick blundering forward, unable to find the way. This symbolizes lack of insight into reality manifested in actions of body, speech, and mind. The meaning, this, I apologize for the typo, the rather extensive typo. This symbolizing Jesus. I wonder what I was thinking there. This symbolizes, yeah, anyway, this symbolizes the innate ignorance of confusion, what we were just talking about here, which imputes a solid reality upon appearances. This is the basis for the mistaken belief in a true self and other. So this is what we just looked at. Then we begin to do things from that point. A potter shaping clay objects, deliberate activities akin to those that shape life and daily existence, also called volitional actions or karmic formations, samskaras, right? You have the Sanskrit up there. So the meaning, based on the belief in a true I, there follows mental inclinations leading to actions that produce either pleasant, painful, or neutral experiences. Then we have consciousness. Image, a monkey in a tree restlessly scampering about, picking fruit at random, symbolizing uncontrolled sense consciousness jumping from one object to the next. The meaning, consciousness as a continuity of actions has two aspects, the moment of causal action and the moment of resulting experience. 4. Name and form, Nama-rupa. The two people in a boat, a third steering, symbolizing human psychological and physical elements are dependent and inseparable. Together, they float on the stream of existence. Meaning, name refers to the four aggregates that constitute a sense of individuality, identity. And these are then the skandhas of feeling, perception, conditioning factors, and consciousness. While form refers to the physical form. So the nama and the rupa, they're then these two, the name and form, and they're being steered by the fundamental ignorance that's basic to existence. 6 senses, image, a house with 5 windows and 1 door, symbolizing the window represent the 5 senses and the door the mind. These are the organs by which the outer world is perceived, meaning there are 5 faculties of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, as well as the mental faculty. And we very often also in this image have a monkey that's peering out from either of these windows or the door. And this is then the mind that is sort of always, you could say, its attention. Consciousness can actually only, rather we engage with the senses. Consciousness engages with the objects, the sense objects, just moment by moment. So it's never one thing. We think that there's 2 things happening. You're seeing something, you're hearing something. It appears like that, but it's actually very fine moments in which we go back and forth. So that's where the monkey sort of peering out of one window, then going to the next window, is actually symbolizes how we have these moment by moment instances. And that's how consciousness engages with the 6 senses. So then contact, sparsha, image, a man and a woman embracing, symbolizing the senses are making contact with the world. The mind and body interact in sensual perception, meaning the meeting of the senses and the object producing the experience of phenomena. So that's contact. Feeling. Vedana, image, a man with an arrow in his eye, symbolizing the swiftness and accuracy of the arrow, symbolizing Jesus, the power of outer reality making powerful contact with inner reality, the way that we then have sensation on the basis of our contact. The feelings of pleasure, displeasure, or neutrality arising when objects are encountered. Craving, someone was asking about craving, jashna, man eating and drinking, symbolizing, illustrate desire stimulated by perception and emotions that lead to more attachment to the world of appearances, meaning subsequent to feeling, there is a desire to experience pleasure and avoid displeasure. So that's where, on the basis of that, we then had the 9, grasping, a person plucking fruit from a tree, symbolizing desire for the fruit leads the person to climbing the tree and grasping for the fruit. The fruit represents impermanent matter, meaning the impulse to seize the desired object once craving arises. But of course, what we also see here is that these are all objects. Becoming, bhava, image, a woman moving towards her lover, sometimes a pregnant woman, symbolizing the action symbolizes bringing into existence, continuation, and cessation. We actually walk towards things. We enter into new situations. We're moving on. This is what we would call becoming, continually entering into the field of possibilities. So then from there we have birth, jati. It's image, a woman about to or giving birth, symbolizing birth arises from becoming. It is the beginning of the suffering, right? We're studying these days. Living is dying, right? So birth is a metaphor for new arisings, mental or physical, meaning due to the above causes and conditions, consciousness takes birth in one of the 6 realms. What's important here is to understand that, yes, we're talking about lifetimes. We're also talking about, you could say, the logic of situations, how we actually go for situations on the basis of our particular skandhas, inclinations, and driven by ignorance, we have these sort of karmic patterns, and then this create particular styles of experience. In fact, suffering. So this is something that patterns that repeat throughout all situations that we live. The craving that makes us go forward, wishing this or that. So that's where then we end up coming into situations, and then the last one, old age and death, jara, marana, image, a man carrying a wrapped up corpse, symbolizing old age and death are the inevitable consequences of being born. Meaning, when the causes and conditions that sustain the physical form or a particular situation are exhausted, death or the ending of a situation occurs. Yet as long as there is still ignorance, these links continue to interdependently perpetuate samsara and its sufferings. So this is where we wander in this cycle, but lifetime after lifetime, situation after situation, and we do so simply just tagging along with this set of causes and conditions. What we're proposing here is to put an end to this through awareness, through you could say, remedying ignorance with insight. And that's where the fundamental deluded mind is then replaced by awareness. And this is what we cultivate on the basis of prajna through the path. We hear the teaching, we ponder it, we see how it applies to ourselves, and then we proceed to diminish our confusion and realize or cultivate this capacity that sort of is the antidote to our unawareness. So that's where then it says here, old age and death are grouped together as a single link, although it is true that sometimes beings die before they get old, so there is no certainty that these two stages will manifest in all cases. Suffering is many faceted. It covers mental sorrow and lamentation due to unwanted events, and also physical ills, frustration, and agitation arising through quarreling and strife. Not everything happens to everyone. For this reason, suffering is not posited as a separate link, but in order that we might experience sadness with regards to the miseries that are part and parcel of samsaric birth, suffering is discussed under the heading of aging and death. Sometimes in the 12 links, we also add to that lamentation and suffering in various kinds. Now we're going to go over 4 ways of presenting the principle of dependent arising, but just with some sensitivity to possible this for some could be a lot, I'm going to just say, let's just call it a day. I've also just done a whole day of presenting programs. So I'm inclined to, as I sometimes do, to sort of maybe just leave out the last 5 or 10 minutes, but I'll go over the questions that might be here. Let's see here. Okay, let's see. Thank you for your questions, by the way. How we learn to crave. Well, again, this is not so much something we learn, but it's more, you could say, the natural expression of ignorance. I have a feeling that ignorance have its own life in me. That's right. That's kind of true. But now we're onto it. Until now, we were unconscious of it. Now we're onto it. That's a very important point, actually. Yes, until now, it's had a life of its own. But now it's a bit like Gollum. We found Gollum. Gollum likes to stay in the shadows. We're taking it out, and we're seeing that this Wizard of Oz that has been ruling us, actually, when it comes to it, is not that big and powerful, and we needn't actually be controlled by this ignorance. I wish when there are references to Greek philosophy, we would also refer to others. For example, Socrates believed there are not gods or divinities at all. Okay, all right, yes. Well, excellent. This is interesting, by the way, I didn't know that. But again, we have to remember that essentially we had the Greeks, which were very rational. And so, yes, that's very possible. Then again, when in Greek context we talk about gods, we're actually not talking about creators. We're just talking about Zeus and Athena, and Mercury, Mercury, and so on. So we're talking about the gods as essentially beings, other beings. And that's where you say the Greek gods and the Nordic gods, the ones from Valhalla, Odin, Thor, Zeus, Freya, all of these were powerful beings. Just like we could say, certain beings in the world are powerful, could be, the people in the government or the mafiosi, whatever. But there's a sense that they're just ordinary persons that happen to have particular powers. So that's where Socrates, of course, was then the teacher of Plato. And Plato then had a particular, his philosophy again evolved along lines of more understanding the ontological status of phenomena. And then again, what's interesting is that Aristotle, he was the disciple of Plato, and yet he began to develop his own particular views. So it's interesting that the lineage we have in Western philosophy are more guys that sort of inspire each other, but then they very often go completely different ways in terms of philosophy. But we say Plato was very much sort of the one that sort of looked at the higher issues, and Aristotle was much more about just the sort of the workings of the world. But anyway, so let's see here. I've never heard or read before that conditions modify the qualities of the way something manifests. From Venerable Kenshin's 12 Links reading. Does this mean a particular seed of karma can ripen in different ways? Definitely. And that is so significant. So maybe reread this section, because what we mean with conditions is that you have a apple seed, but how that apple tree becomes, an apple, how that seed matures has a lot to do with the soil, with the moisture, with the sunlight, and so on. And that's how also we would say karma is not just this one-shot deal that you do something and this arises. It's modified by so many different, you could say, factors. So this is very important. When we talk about karma in the Buddhist sense, we talk about the cause and then the conditions that lead to a particular result. Yeah. Do the linking of self is provoked by our body, mind, and senses? Yes, it has a lot to do with that. We would say that, again, this creating the body, mind, and the senses and all of that, this is something that is originates by ignorance. And on the basis of ignorance, like we saw, we have impulse, samskaras, and then we have consciousness, and then we have name and form. So all of these actually, they originate on the basis of ignorance. More than intelligence, the Sanskrit vidya points to true and valid knowledge. Very good. Okay. Yes, that's it. And also, in fact, in Tibetan, for example, science in Tibetan is referred to as, again, Jigpa or Jigne, the knowledge or the structures around knowing. So knowing has a very broad sense, also in Tibetan. Yeah. Is the first self-consciousness moment the co-emergent ignorance? Yes. That have the initial sort of, then we have co-emergent ignorance, and then we have labeling ignorance. So we Hlenchit Kepe Marikpa, and then Kuntutakpe Marikpa. And that actually, if you read more in that, what I'll upload in the resource folder, that chapter we just looked at, then actually Trungpa Rinpoche talks about these two. But prior to that, there's also something called Dani Chikpu Marikpa. It's sort of the single origin. That's that fundamental ignorance from which then self and other evolves, and from which then we begin to label things. I'd love to have a definition of what we are instead of self. Would it be more useful to think of ourselves as something like a point of awareness, cognizing endless moments of self-consciousness while trapped in a flesh hotel? Yeah, that kind of thing. We can speculate. Yeah, we can label it however we like, but the bottom line is it's there. ignorance there, and we're happy when people praise us and we're annoyed when they criticize us, etc. Right? So there's a very raw, non-philosophical dimension of this. And that's where we can also see there's a place where we, on certain days, will be very annoyed if we are criticized, and other days we'll be quite relaxed, and people criticize us and we'll sort of just shrug it off. We won't be terribly worried. So there's a very real sense of self that we are addressing here. I remember reading Jeff Hopkins' description of some classes in some of the monasteries where, when discussing Madhyamika, no self, and so on, the teacher would actually begin the class by telling one of the students, "I know you've stolen 100 rupees from me," and the student will go, "Me? No, I haven't." Of course, it's a completely unjust accusation, but that would bring out a strong sense of identity. And the students, they're sort of robust enough, they can take it. But that's where there's a very keen sense of self. So it's very non-philosophical, non-theoretical, this discussion here. But yes, we can definitely think of it in terms of, you can say the distortion takes place within a dynamic of ignorance, varying degrees, right? But we want to get to the bottom of it, but we can call it various things. You can say in the nature of reality, we could just say, well, there's the primordially pure ground, things like that, prior to even samsara and nirvana. So that's why in some of the teachings we talk about it like that. And it's good that we have an appreciation of the basic goodness, that our disposition, our fundamental space of being is actually not diluted. It's something that's external to us. And that's why it's so important. We would say this first moment of ignorance, not a permanent, you could say, entity, but just something that's caused moment by moment. We perpetuate this ignorance and everything that comes from it. What is the result of correctly understanding the 12 links? Realization of emptiness, the realization of this primordial ground. And that's, again, seeing our reality for what it is. That's why we're interested in looking at reality. We're interested in seeing, how does this ego come about? What constitutes the ego? And so forth. So once we realize that, it's where ignorance is replaced by complete enlightenment. So the result of understanding the 12 links, that's enlightenment. When we have the wheel of existence, we very often see outside, there's the Buddha standing there pointing to the moon. So that's where the Buddha is outside of that and saying, look, look at freedom, look at relief, look at freedom. Question: do the 12 links occur over a course of moments? For example, all 12 steps could occur in 1 hour, but also they could take a whole lifetime to finalize. They can take place within seconds, microseconds. So they're there as something that holds us, but we can also look at this development to dissect it in terms of where did we get. But we're going to be looking at how it plays out over several lifetimes in the next lesson or the next few classes. Yeah? Aside, for Socrates, God is a truly good being. To be truly or perfectly good implies that one has only goodness in oneself, no evil. Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, that's we could say that sounds a lot like what we call Samantabhadra, the all good, Kundazangpo. Yeah. And that's also where we go back to Saint Anselm's God proof. I would say, for us to the existence of God is actually premised that we can imagine goodness. The fact that we can imagine goodness, that is, you'd say, the proof that we're not defined by our, you'd say, ordinary confusion. And so there's that actually is, and again, in logic we talk about Occam's razor. The simplest solution is probably the most accurate. And that, you could say, Saint Anselm has a very profound, very direct appreciation of God in that sense, because this is more in the mystical sense of the word, and very often that we would say that we understand God as a creator and so on. But some of the Christians actually had an incredibly profound understanding of God that sort of aligns itself to some extent with what we call Buddha nature. The only thing is we don't think of this nature as something that's permanent, unitary, and we don't think of it as a creator as such. This is really just more, you could say, this is the underlying ground in which you could say our confusion might play out or enlightenment might play out. So are humans the only beings able to dismantle the 12 links? We would say that the higher realms of samsara accommodates this possibility. That's where we have creative intelligence, where we can understand cause and effect and understand how what we do has an effect. So this is where the teachings on the Four Noble Truths and so on could be taught. But we do also say that the best place is the human realm, because we have sort of a little bit of an equal exposure to both suffering and happiness, and the possibility of reflecting. So that's where the God realm, too much pleasure, the titans or the warring gods, the demigods, too much sort of caught up in their agendas of fighting, aggression, jealousy, and so on. So Socrates still seems to have had the dualistic view of good and bad. Well, let's see what he would say to that, because he might actually understand you could say the non-duality as being the goodness. Yeah, and our appreciation of goodness could very well intuitively lie beyond the ordinary constructs of good and bad. Depends. Co-emergent wisdom. Do we have it from the beginning, like co-emergent wisdom? Do we have it from the beginning, like co-emergent ignorance? Yes, that's why it's called co-emergent, because that's where, despite us getting confused and getting caught up in co-emergent or getting caught up in ignorance, at the same time, wisdom never is corrupted. So you could say these are creations on the basis of misunderstanding the primordial ground. And that's why while we have this ignorance that emerges, at the same time also wisdom remains uncorrupted. So we have co-emergent ignorance and co-emergent ignorance and co-emergent wisdom. That's why they're called co-emergent. I noticed there is another way of talking about tendril, dependent arising, in terms of auspicious coincidence. Is that type of tendril more related to the study of Tantra? Not necessarily. Well, but it is, right. We're going to be looking at actually dependent arising in various ways. And what you're talking about there has actually, yeah, it is a little bit more from the point of view of Tantra, and it's a way in which, if we're looking at Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings on the karma, that he talks a lot about dependent arising in terms of the auspicious conditions, simply just that you could say phenomena is true to itself. So of course it could be true in the sense that we create the wrong conditions that drive, well, you could say conditions that are not favorable to us and that drive suffering. We can also create the favorable conditions favorable to us that drive pleasant conditions. And that's where we would say there is this sense of working with phenomena and being able to create them, and there is this beautiful unfolding that could take place. That's where also when we talk about, you say, good connections between people or good signs and so on, we refer to that as tendril. You know, Tibetans tendril yakpo, you know, good tendril or good auspicious conditions. Okay, so we're just coming up to, well, we ended up having 1 hour, and so here we have proclaim the Buddhist teaching, and somebody says hallelujah. So there we have it, hallelujah. So that's good. On that auspicious notes, there's good tendril there. Mazel tov. Okay, what else do we have? Do the faith to invoke this co-emergent wisdom. Faith is very helpful in terms of understanding and realizing the co-emergent wisdom, because wisdom is essentially beyond the scope of, you could say, the ordinary linear mind, the dualistic mind. So that's where the way we can engage, and you could say something greater, comes a lot from this capacity to be open. So that's where faith plays in. Yes, faith is essential really for the realization of co-emergent wisdom. All right. I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for your joining me here in this study. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.